Welcome to today's Pandell Leadership Series webinar called Land Management Pitfalls and Trends. My name is Eliza. I am the Customer Engagement and Training Manager. We are lucky to have Matt here with us. So Matt is a manager of land services with EY and is a lifetime land professional with heavy experience in renewables, linear rights, and oil and gas sectors. He's a member of the American Association of Professional Landmen and the Houston Association of Professional Landmen. And he has experience managing large teams and projects and is the ideal person to discuss land management pitfalls and trends in today's world. So welcome, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. A former Pandellian as well. So hopefully all of the rest of the Pandellians on here, it'd be good to see everybody, though I can't see you. So as Eliza mentioned, right? So I just wanted to spend a moment up here up front and kind of talk about what's going on with UI. I don't know that everyone understands what type of offerings we have. Looking at our next gen energy services and really where I sit within the firm, we wanted to take a new approach to an old problem where traditionally managed service models that focus on cost reduction and FTE free up, they struggle to keep up with changing demands in technology landscape. They usually fail in regards to scalability and supporting ever evolving business needs. Our solution really looks to take a more modern approach to create a foundation of continuous improvement, right? Coupled with AI, cloud, data. And when looking at our approach, it's really our goal to bring all of EY. That traditionally EY services are looked at on a project basis, right? We have a need or a problem, EY can help solution that problem. But we really wanted to take a more amortized look at that and, okay, we can solve the problem, but along the way, we want to do a better job of modernizing the solution, which could be an upgrade to legacy IT or a migration to the cloud or integration of digital twins. We want to be able to optimize by leveraging AI and automation where we can and provide better transparency and analytics, which can help reduce costs. We want to be able to operate where need be on a daily basis of functions. So really just having humans from EY do some of the work where we provide the most value in the day-to-days. And then we want to be able to evolve our solutions where we're always looking at continuous transformation of our offerings to stay up to date with changing landscape in regard to business needs and technology. So if there's any questions specific to EY after this, I'd be happy to answer as well. But really wanted to jump into what we're here for, right? And it's kind of a bit of dialogue that we wanted to come up with around some of the pitfalls and trends that we've seen in land management along the years. I've been in this industry for 15 years now and in a couple of different capacities and lived through some acquisitions, lived through some job changes and role changes and met a lot of great people along the way that have helped influence some of these answers to kind of what we see in the market and what we're still dealing with things that might be age-old problems.
So as Matt mentioned, today's format is a little bit of a discussion more than anything else. So we're going to dive on in. We've got some of our top questions we thought would be relevant and interesting to the audience. So the first one, Matt, is what key trends have you observed in land management over the years from an industry, professional, and consultant standpoint?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question to start off with. At the forefront of these trends has to be the tech evolution over the last 15 years, with energy operators looking to move to the cloud and SaaS products. When I got started, it was a very heavy on-prem installations with long UAT times and downtimes for maintenance and heavy customization and integrations were clunky or manual. And then, layer that on with tons of swivel chair. With newer SaaS products and cloud environments, it makes it easier for operators to offload some of those costs related to infrastructure and have seamless upgrades to always be on the latest and greatest versions. As a direct result of that, I also think the M&A activity in the software market has changed things quite a bit. When I got started, there were several boutique shops and more competition in the land management software market, where really now there's 5 or 6 with major market share. And these players grew the same way that their customer base did, merging and buying up the little guys. And that's really contributed to the need for data analytics and maintenance of big data when we're talking about M&A from the customer base. You look at some of the super major oil and gas companies that have millions of net acres and unconventional strategy alone. That's an unbelievable amount of maintenance and tracking of land agreements, especially when you have sometimes multinational teams that own portions of the workflow to sustain the business and how the data is relied on every step of the way and where those handoffs happen. Or you look at even some of the largest pipeline companies where, the big ones have almost 100,000 miles of pipe or more. So, if you put that in perspective, that'd be like having a 40-lane highway wide of pipelines from LA to New York. So the number of parcels that those things cross and the amount of agreements that are needed there for maintenance is an undertaking. So, you can imagine sustainability coupled with risk mitigation across all of those large data sets and trying to ensure regulatory compliance are huge. And so, all it takes is one missed provision or obligation, and you can be in breach of contract, which can sometimes lead to litigation. So, with that in mind, I think recently there are trends towards automation and really embracing AI where we can, to help streamline some of those processes, ensure accuracy, really drive the confidence up on some of those project controls that are so necessary. Obviously keeping humans in the loop, of course, but doing more with less, more accurately would be the goal there to help with those integration points. So, and those integration points have also seen software companies push more towards a suite of products where you might have a land management and accounting and ECM and GIS tools and a host of other applications that surround the land and accounting efforts. So that way you can kind of have one preferred vendor for all of your solutions. And it really wasn't always that way. That way, all your solutions play in the sandbox well with each other, right? If you think about like a Microsoft solution, we don't want to sell you just Word. We want to sell you Excel and Edge and PowerPoint and everything. The list goes on, right? So I'd say a lot has changed since I got started, and it'll continue to change with the consistent technology evolution, changing business needs and government regulation. So I think to sum it up, the real trend is that change is constant, and the operators that succeed in that market are the ones that are able to, adapt, evolve, and survive.
So true. So true. Yeah, some really good points there. Thank you for that. So, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges currently that landowners and energy operators face in managing their assets effectively?
Yeah, we just kind of mentioned some about data at scale, right? And how cumbersome some of those data sets can be. So that's definitely a challenge first and foremost. And again, it's the quality of that data to begin with. So, everything an operator might want to do with AI integrations, reporting, some of the stuff that we just called out, they're only as good as the data that's behind it, right? All downstream tools are meaningless if the source is from reliable data or unreliable data, that is. So, I think the integration and data flow is an issue, but most of the time it's from bad data. It's not a technology limitation. If I were to look at the question from a private landowner to an energy operator relationship scenario and how communication between those parties is conducted, I think that land ops and agreement procurement, the people in the field actually acquiring these agreements, regardless of industry, face some of the same challenges around how to identify the targets, how's the best way to communicate, how to negotiate, how to get those executed agreements back into the flow for the back office, and then how do we maintain those relationships with grantors and lessors over the agreement life cycle. And to that end, owner relations efforts can go a long way in mitigating risk by making sure we have the right agreements in place with the right languages up front, and therefore ensuring compliance kind of every step of the way. And then that we compensate those grantors and lessors appropriately. I think now more than ever, owner relations has taken more of a customer success vision than ever before, and I think it'll continue in that direction. I think one thing that should be called out as well, that we just have much smarter landowners now. The information age has changed how much knowledge is out there over what's the value of what I own, what's a good price for it, what are the terms that I should negotiate, and what should I bend and not bend on. The modern negotiation cycle is a painful one for operators and brokers in that contact with the landowners themselves. And that's no fault of landowners, right? It's just everybody's trying to get the best deal possible for themselves. So,
Of course.
I think that environmental concerns might even play into this sometimes, and maybe misinformation around those environmental concerns can drive decisions and pushbacks from the landowner. So, having a great strategy around that relationship, I think is a big telltale on, how do we go about this the right way and ensure that owners of the land are being respected and feel respected and treated likewise from energy operators.
Yeah. So quality data and really respectful relationships is what you're basically saying there in summary. And this kind of relates to what you just said, but we'll ask it anyway in case it brings up other points. So, common mistakes that you see energy operators make when handling land records and contracts, because that relates to the quality of the data, right?
Sure. Yeah. And to your point on the quality of the data, it's the lack of due diligence in maintaining the data. It's been a common trend, I feel like, through our first few questions here, like we just talked about, but it still rings true for this one. For land admin in particular, the work isn't done when the agreement is executed. It's really just the beginning. So making sure that the land department is on top of all the provisions, that we have a clear obligation calendar and a great way of electronically tracking those obligations, that we're updating ownership, owner contacts, wells in division order, or asset tracking from other industries, outside of oil and gas, where these assets reside and what agreements influence them. Not to mention the amount of due diligence required in making any trade or acquisition, right? So when you're receiving agreements that aren't your own, that were not drafted by your departments, there can be ambiguity in those documents that don't really fit into your normal rules and practice. So, curating those deficiencies can be difficult to get them in line with your standards, and not to mention you'll need a well-trained staff with clear tasks and communication, all while combating attrition and rollover, right? So how do we maintain that staff and train those people up appropriately? So, when you look at that all-encompassing work that I'm going to dump into due diligence, it's a pretty daunting task, and to get it all done accurately and efficiently is even more daunting. So, scaling of the land department can be an issue at the same time. And I really think that any company not embracing a managed service or a co-service model is not taking advantage of, okay, how do we eat this elephant, right? That these managed services can alleviate strain on staffing. They can help companies take a step back and evolve their practice and ensure that, the people, process, technology are always evolving to defeat the problems that we just literally called out. I think sometimes there's a bit of pride that's hard to swallow for some larger companies in the view of, we're a super major company and we always know best, which sometimes they do, but the fallacy there is that, a service provider brings a fresh view of how competitors might be doing something better, or a different vision on how to solve a problem through best practice. So, I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls for them is how do we scale, how do we stay accurate, and all of that surrounds due diligence and comes back to the data is at the heart of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, so true. And you already alluded to this a bit, but technology has changed a ton. So in your opinion, how has technology changed the way land assets are managed over the years?
Yeah, I think we talked to some of the cloud migration and SaaS offerings, but we haven't really called out a few specific technologies that are kind of, I would say, revolutionizing land management outside of just the tech stack, right? Outside of just, hey, what does our back end look like? What's our product offering look like? And outside of land management system design, right? So I would say first off, that would be GIS, and I feel like GIS is not new. I mean, Esri was founded in 1969. ArcGIS desktop's been around for 25 years now. But the evolution of GIS and the application of it has changed so much. And gone are the days of just, agreement polygons with attributes on a map. Now with web-based interfaces, 3D mapping, the sharing of data, the number of data vendors in the market, the industry know-how on how do we bring all the elements of our business, all the intel that we have, so that we can be the best at decision making is much different than it's ever been, and even much different than it has been in the last 5 to 10 years. I'm a bit of a GIS nerd, so for those on the call that know me, probably assumed I might start off there. But there's other ancillary technologies outside of the land management system that are influencing land management. And I would say, remote monitoring and SCADA data, where real-time data flows are happening for real-time decisions, is important. These can span all kinds of needs from land management related to assets, and they can be used where things that used to be very time intensive, the amount of time to report back from the field on what's happening with operations, the ability to use mobile applications for field data capture and communication for ops and the reporting of that back to land, integrations of every one of those data points so that a company, can decrease cross-departmental question asking and delays at a minimum, decrease the swivel chair from system to system. And then hitting on AI again has been a really revolutionary most recently, to have that over the top of all that. So that, the human hours that are spent are more strategic and less administrative. Everything that we can offload from automated task lists, and free up the everyday employee to do things that are meaningful. has been a major change in the last couple of years there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can say that I am not a GIS expert, but I have worked with Pandell ESG for some time now, and I've seen a huge change and growth in the GIS tools and how much efficiency they've gained, both us and our customers. It's been pretty amazing. So that's a really good point. Um, so moving on, when advising your clients, what factors do you tell them to consider when choosing a modern land management system?
Yeah, I think first and foremost here is user friendliness and adoption, right? Like this isn't, um, if you aren't going to have a user group that's engaged, you end up just selling shelfware, right? It never gets used and it provides no value. Does the ideology of how you store your agreements and structure make sense to how you view land? Everybody has a different angle and perspective on land management, and the way that the applications fit in there needs to match with that view. A classic one is kind of a tract versus agreement based systems, and the impact that has on the level of maintenance and the way that your department views land, like I said. So, if you're getting something off the ground from scratch, and that was the ask, or a new implementation, I would say with no previous system, the user group in the market is important too, right? If you don't already have a user group that's eager to learn, who's going to maintain the data? And basically you need competent people that understand the system and your view that are coming from the outside. And that flows a bit into scalability, right? Does it meet your needs where you expect to be with your business in 5 to 10 years? Does it possess integration capabilities for all the systems we've kind of called out in some of the previous questions? Does it feed things like documents and GIS and accounting, et cetera? Can you report out of it with some level of customization? Or even better, does it give you access to the data where you can expose that data to other systems and report more robustly off of it? Does it have security level that you're looking for, from a role and a user level, but also from a data storage level, right? Like, is that data in the cloud? What compliance does the vendor have from a tech stack and how comfortable are you with the way your data is stored and backed up? I mean, ultimately it's your data and you want to make sure that it's protected, right? That the SOX compliance, if it applies to you in your business, if you're publicly traded, and from a compliance perspective, all other regulatory compliance, right? Does it meet state and federal, as well as some of the EU mandates that we've had over the last few years surrounding data controls, FASB compatibility for accurate reporting. I also think role configurations for light customization so that the vendor doesn't change their data model or create custom versioning for you, but rather each user having some set of functionality that gives a bit of a tailored look and feel. And lastly, what does it cost, right? how is the cost structure? Is it by data? Is it a user license thing? How great is the support? Do you have to pay for the support? Is there robust training to help with the familiarity and all the scalability that we talked about before? And so, it really, I think when you're looking at what solution is best, it also teams up with what does the vendor look like, right? How long have they been around? Do they have customers like you? What's their net promoter score in relation to customer success? So I think it's just as much the vendor as it is the product on finding the perfect fit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you already said it, but I was going to say it because I'm biased because I'm in customer engagement. But I think there's a lot to be said for good support and good training and education materials that can support the customer, not through just the initial phase, but the lifetime that they're using the product, and that those resources stay up to date so that they're always supported as things change, because things change so quickly. It's crazy how quickly technology is changing. So yeah, those are
100%.
really good points.
And you look at it from even just a people relationship standpoint. If it's a I'm Matt and I always call Eliza for my issues, and
Right.
Eliza's no longer there. Or
Yeah,
Matt's
yeah,
no
that's a
longer
good
there,
point.
and who
Yeah.
handles that carryover and handoff of responsibilities. I think
Absolutely. Yeah,
having
those
some depth
relationships
is important.
matter. They do. They really do. Yeah, for sure. Um, well, we got one more question. What's the outlook for renewable projects next sort of 12 to 24 months? And how can project leaders use land products and services to accelerate development while staying on budget?
Yeah, I think it's positive for sure with the increased investment in the area from equity and private equity. You couple that with the available tax credits that are out there from a government standpoint. there should be favorable market growth for the sector over the next 12 to 24. I think there will be tech advancements and new ideas for energy capture and for what we mean when we say renewables. Like traditionally, we think of that as wind and solar, but what about thermo? What about hydro? What about carbon capture? What about battery storage? You know, there's a lot of new emerging technologies, and some have been around, but I think the broad umbrella of renewables will start to break down over the next few years into these niche areas with solutions tailored for those assets themselves. You know, so this really applies for the field services as well. Like, you know, not only the back office software and the technologies that support it, but how the assets themselves are constructed and sourced. And that might be one of the negatives to focus on is supply chain, right? Like, you know, how do we source all the goods for production to prevent project delays? And to the questions that point to like, how does that relate to land? I would say, how do we cross the hurdle with site selection? You know, all the variables that go into choosing the perfect site, from tree coverage, drainage, meteorological surveys and studies, you know, et cetera. The list goes on. That, you know, we're really choosing the best sites, and there's a direct correlation between the renewable energy growth and utility industry growth. You know, so those are very tied at the hip. You know, having a wind farm or a solar farm with or any electricity generating renewable energy for that matter, without having a substation or expansive battery storage system is like having an oil well without a tank battery or a pipeline. You know, you have a product to sell, but there's no way to take it to the market. So, you know, if you think of the same rate that renewables will grow, you will see grid scale utilities growing at the same rate due to those needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. What are the business motivations for choosing renewable energy sources over traditional? That's a great question.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think to summarize it up, we've seen most recently several upstream oil and gas companies dabbling into the renewables market, most of them into the carbon capture areas, because carbon capture normally works off of a brine injection well, which is usually can be used from an older gas storage well, right? So it's an easy crossover, and all of the carbon capture credits that are out there for us to make sure that we're decarbonization is at the forefront of the strategy. You'll also see in the places where surface lease use has the ability to be coupled for solar and wind technologies. We've seen several companies dabbling between that industry as well, where we have dual purpose land, right? Maybe we still have old lasting production on a massive piece of property, but we have the ability to reuse some of that for solar and wind projects. There's been a couple of them in the news in the last couple of years on large multinational companies applying those types of strategies. Okay. So I don't think that the answer to the question is, I don't think that they're deciding one or the other.
Right. It's not that black and white. We got a couple more questions, so this is awesome. Do you happen to utilize a few different programs to get your data? And if so, how do you merge them together?
Yeah, so data can mean so many things. We do a lot with GIS at EY, and we obviously have a couple of data providers that help us get our day-to-days done for the clients that we support. The other side of data on being able to maintenance data, usually as a service provider, we're dealing with what's on base at the customer already, at the client, right? So every one of those looks different in how we're able to integrate those data, how we move data, what individual restrictions look like, how those departments are set up. And so it's refreshing, because anybody that's worked in services, even from a software standpoint, you know, every door that you walk into is a little bit different in the way that the client views their data, the way that the technology stack is there, what vendors are in place. So it's a constant on your toes about what makes the most sense for this situation right now. What's the best opportunity for this client? And so that's really what it is. It's Pandora's box every time.
Yeah, very true. Very true. One more, it looks like. Are economic uncertainties impacting traditional versus renewable energy in different ways?
So I'm sure there are. I would say that the difference between those is there's kind of an inverse in the value of electricity compared to the cost to generate it. So if you look at it from an upstream standpoint, when upstream is in the dumps, renewable energy and electric transmission are doing well. And the reason for that being is, when oil and gas is in the dumps, you don't pay less for your electricity, right? That's a pretty constant thing. So the feedstocks that go into supplying that electricity are only cheaper, right? So the margin is better for those types of customers. So there's many impacts to that need, and it's a lengthy question on what influences the price of all these things. And I'm no economics major, but I would say that that's the direct inverse relation between the two, between traditional feedstock oil and gas type provided energy and what renewables have to offer.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. What role can solution providers play in shaping the future of land management with energy companies?
We play a different role than normally the software company would be. And as far as seeing the specific use cases at a customer are a bit different if you're a vendor that provides land management software, you kind of have a view of what you think your product does in the market, what you're really good at, where your home run ball is, right? And for us, we see a bit different on all the ancillary systems that feed into that, how all of the stuff I talked about from an integration standpoint and the availability of data, the user friendliness of it, the willingness to maintain it, the due diligence that's involved with it. We bring a bit of a different all-encompassing view to the ecosystem that creates the entirety of the land department, because it's not just the land management software. So I think that there's a bit of feedback and knowledge base from a service provider perspective that doesn't have just one vision of what our land management software does, but rather a conglomerate of best-in-class offerings pinning the client on what would work best for you. And again, back to that Pandora's box of everybody's environment is different in software selection and the way that they store data and maintain it. Our view is a bit just more of variety than compared to a single view from a software solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, and incredibly valuable insight, I'm sure. So I think we'll wrap it up there, but thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to everyone in the audience for participating. And it's great to see you again, Matt, and great to have your time today. Thanks so much.
It was as well. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.